Welcome everyone to this edition of Print Speak. My name is Rebecca Travis, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the curator and the collections manager at Open Studio. We're really excited today to be joined by artist Alex Linfield for his talk titled Source Code of the Digital, which is running in conjunction with his current exhibition WYSIWYG, which we're showing in our main gallery space at the moment. Before we begin, I'd just like to do a land acknowledgement for where Open Studio is situated. Open Studio acknowledges that it is situated on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. They are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we continue to create and exist. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, there's a bit about Open Studio. Welcome. We're an artist-run center dedicated to contemporary print. We offer accessible, inclusive, and affordable printmaking facilities, programs, and services for artists and the public across Canada and abroad. We support artists in creating and exhibiting contemporary print in open-minded, safe, and collaborative environment. And our vision is to shape the exploration of print as essential, dynamic, and relevant to contemporary culture and creative thought. The Print Speak series is a virtual education series that focuses on the incredible artists whose work pushes the boundaries of print media. These talks are going to take you on a journey with each artist to learn about their passion for creating. And just a couple of housekeeping things. We'll keep everyone on mute for the talk. And this is going to be approximately a 30-minute artist talk, and then we'll open up to questions for the last 15 minutes or so. And you can put your questions in the chat, or you can use your raised hand emoji, and we'll get to you in the Q&A section at the end. So now I'm really pleased to introduce Alex Linfield. Alex is a multidisciplinary artist and printmaker with a Master of Fine Arts from NSCAD University and a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Alberta. Raised in Treaty 8 territory, Grande Prairie, Alberta, Linfield worked in manufacturing and industry, which sparked his interest in reproducibility, mass-produced objects, and industrial tools. During his MFA, he was introduced to thing theory, a philosophy of objects, and media theory, which greatly influenced his recent body of work titled WYSIWYG. Linfield has exhibited nationally and internationally, with recent exhibitions including the International Print Biennale in Trois, Rivieres, Snap Gallery in Edmonton, and Kent State University in Ohio. Alex is currently based in Mohkinstsis, Treaty 7 territory, Calgary, Alberta. In this Print Speak session titled Source Code of the Digital, Alex will discuss the progression of media, tracing through lines from print media into digital media to better understand the current moment's technology. This talk will look at examples of skeuomorphism, etymology, and other precedents which inform the execution and content of his ongoing body of work, WYSIWYG, as well as the media tools and artifacts of today. Using print media as a precedent to new digital media, this talk will question whether new media actually means new problems. Alex, over to you.
Hello, welcome all. Thanks so much for coming. I'm just going to get set here. And Laura, I'm just going to share my screen, okay?
You're good to go.
There we go. Can everyone see what I'm sharing here? Great, okay. Now, hopefully you're looking at my slides and not my notes, but okay, so thank you so much for coming. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So I'm coming to you from so-called Calgary at the University of Calgary here, where I work as a technician in printmaking, ceramics, metal shop, many different things, which is maybe why my work has taken such a multidisciplinary lean, okay? So I'm just gonna keep going here. I get very nervous during these talks, so I hope I can keep it together. So I'm going to be discussing the body of work that is currently on exhibition at Open Studio Toronto, as well as kind of the inspirations and research methods that led to what you can actually see in the gallery today. And so looking at kind of my research methodologies, as loose as they are, and how it kind of helps me make the decisions that I make, and work through the thoughts and develop the work both in collaboration between researching and making. And because this is Zoom, I realize many people haven't seen the exhibition, or maybe they've never even seen the work before in any of its other installations. So I'll be going through just quickly at the beginning what's actually happening in the gallery, and what this work physically is, and then going into kind of some of the inspirations and the methods here. And I also just really wanted to thank the entire crew at Open Studio for putting together this talk, helping so much with the exhibition, Pat for doing the lighting and obviously being the director of the whole ship there, Laura with all the programming and communications, Pudi for showing me there's amazing printmaking space and discussing print with me while I was there, and Rebecca for her keen eye on curation. It was a really fantastic team to work with, and I just really want to make sure that they get credit. So what is the work? So the work that's at Open Studio right now are a combination of prints on plexiglass, as well as ceramic works. And the prints on plexiglass are created through multiple different processes, whether it's silkscreen or lithography. And usually it's done through digital photography of surfaces that have been kind of deposited with dust. And then I translate them into kind of these trompe-l'oeil prints that look quite convincingly like dust on glass. But of course, there's always digital manipulations in the surface of it that kind of give it away, that or are kind of a tell that this is something that comes not from a human or artist's hand or something like that, and rather something that come from a digital apparatus and is translated through print media in order to kind of not necessarily dupe you, but to kind of play with ideas of material and process and media, of course. And many of these now I'm moving towards printing through lithography, just because I can get a better kind of trompe-l'oeil, a very convincing surface onto the print through this kind of more high fidelity modality of printing that I developed during a CCA grant a few years ago, which is kind of an alternative form of lithography that I've been working with here at the University of Calgary. And also to using my practice as an artist to kind of add to the discourse of lithography, as well as generate new methods of making images more sustainably and things like that. The ceramic works which accompany these pieces are hollow slip cast ceramics that have been airbrushed. And I like to kind of describe them as like graphic sculpture. So in much the same way that I'm a printmaker, I'm also certainly kind of a sculptor or installation artist. And I like to kind of blur the boundaries between these two discourses. So these graphic sculptures, as I call them, have been airbrushed in such a way that the surface is better described by the airbrushing, but also flattens out much like a Xerox print. And these kind of complement these ideas of materiality and kind of non-materiality that's achieved through print media, digital media, those kinds of themes. So what kind of sparked this idea originally was at the beginning of my master's, I was thinking a lot about media, specifically print media and also digital media. And I was thinking about this link between the two and trying to think about like, what are the ramifications of this new technology, digital media, new media, what you call it, whether that's digital photos or anything like that. And of course, there's some really quick knee-jerk kind of things we can say, like they call this the post-truth era, and that's certainly something that's come from digital media in its many forms. But I was always thinking back to say when like the Gutenberg press was invented or anything along those lines, and all the problems that that created, and whether or not that was actually something totally unique or something that we're experiencing is totally unique to digital media, or if this is something we've been through before. Of course, if you read a lot about technology, lots of theorists and writers will talk about how this isn't a linear progression. Technology isn't a linear progression. Everything is built upon each other. And so I was thinking a lot about what that relationship was, and making quite a few unsuccessful works that tried to kind of poke my way into that idea. There's also, you know, I grew up looking at artists like Liechtenstein who were interested in taking this mark of the artist, or this mark made by the hand, and kind of showing what the media of the time kind of does to it or could do to it to kind of remove or make it absent from the work while also making it present. And there was something really interesting to me, even early on in my bachelor's and still through to my master's and still today, that were kind of in the themes of that work. And there's many artists, but this one I just feel sums it up so quickly, right? This brush stroke that would have come from a human hand, but then developed into this more graphic and reproducible form by Liechtenstein. Kind of a lame example, but I feel like it just sums it up so well. And so I kind of landed early on in this project with this being the question, what is so new about new media? Because of course, if we're going to call it new media, or it's going to be called so-called new media, we should be able to define semantically what is so new. I was also at the time reading John Durham Peters' book, The Marvelous Clouds, Toward a Philosophy of Elemental Media. And this quote, and not much else of the book, but this quote really resonated with me. And it reads, does new media bring new problems, or does it simply breathe new life into some of our oldest anxieties? And I still quote him in my artist statement today, because I think this is just a really poignant way to kind of think about the current moment, whether there's actually new happening here, or is there something in the past we can learn about the present through. And of course, you know, are these shifts significant, impactful, dangerous, unimportant? That's something that I leave to the viewer. And these are things that I'm always thinking about within my work. I'm not trying to say that digital media is bad and it's corrupting our lives and our morality or anything like that, but really just that, you know, what is the implication of these things without moralizing? Okay, so what is new about new media? I do think that there's this relationship between new media being made of code and language, and if we can say old media, always having a relationship to materials. If you think about printmaking, there's always inks, there's papers, even in digital printing, there's something physical about it, and that's what marks it as print media or old media, things like that. Whereas digital media almost entirely relies on code, right? The reproducibility can happen with a JPEG a million times if you just have that piece of code. And it's not actually the thing that's made present to you on the surface or the hardware. It's really rather the thing that's behind it, which is the code. And so I put this slide in here all the time because I really like this idea that digital media has difficulty communicating with us and has to create these kind of almost hieroglyphics in a sense to tell us that something isn't there, because the hardware has nothing to do with the program in some sense, and the image, it's really about what's behind it. And if there's nothing back there, there's no image, there's no code, it has to present something. So there's always this tension with digital media in making present absence. So during my master's, right before I was about to kind of get started producing this work, I also managed to go to New York and see this amazing exhibition that I think contributed a lot to how I approach thinking through my research methods and also my thoughts on digital media. And so this exhibition programmed was really quite unique, I think, in that it put conceptual era work next to a great deal of new media work, and was kind of making this comparison between conceptual era work, which was thought of as dematerialized or just instructions and code, right next to this thing that literally was that. Of course, we can see Lawrence Weiner. The piece isn't the text cut in vinyl. Of course, the piece that you actually buy is the instructions for the text that goes on the wall. And this isn't earlier conceptual era work, right? This isn't a new media work. But if you think about generative art or any digitally based work, the lines are quite blurred there. And so I really like this methodology of putting something new and something old in the same room in order to open the conversation up between each other. And this was something that really resonated in my practice that created this exhibition. So I started thinking a lot about language. Sorry, I'll go back to this slide. I started thinking about this relationship of digital media to language. And also at the time, I was reading different theorists about technology and media, and a lot of them thinking through the motions of technology. Now, they would have been thinking about like older versions of technology, so print and television, things like that. They often went to language, and that was kind of their way at poking the hole into the conversation. And I found that so interesting because with new media, maybe I thought that's where the answers could lie. If we have these images made of code and language, then maybe it was more important to kind of think about how language was changing alongside print media and digital media, and how the transition between these two technologies being prevalent was kind of changing as well. And so rather than thinking about the hardware and materiality, always at least, of digital media in this kind of comparison, I started to think about language very specifically. And so thinking through words like fidelity. Fidelity, obviously, if we go back to earlier meanings of it, meaning something closer to truth, right? Like if something has infidelity or doesn't have a quality of fidelity, then it's untruthful, right? But now, similarly, if you buy a new camera, you can talk about the fidelity of the camera, but it's more quantitative. It's not qualitative anymore. So the amount of pixels that we can jam into a single image is now the measure of its fidelity. But of course, as we know, the more fidelity you can squeeze into, say, a file or something like that, you also have this relationship where it's easier to be duped by it, to think that it's the real thing, or when it's been totally kind of manipulated, right? And so if we think of any digital technology, like digital photo technology, and the advent of Photoshop, you can't trust any image now. And there's ways of looking into the images and figuring out if they have been modified. But I really like this relationship. And I think that said more to me about this transition in media and technology, really, than any of the other gestures or ways that I had thought about coming through into this conversation. And so from there, I started looking at a lot more language that might relate to this, and also trying to apply it to the objects I was trying to make. But of course, with fidelity, right, if you can create a very trompe-l'oeil surface and fool someone, this relationship between the fake and the real became a very important part of what I was trying to do, right? And so this is a print on glass. This is actually in the show at Open Studio. And I just really like these kind of very base materials that have been kind of presented to you, and they might be forgettable or disinteresting, but there's really actually this entire apparatus behind it that is very untruthful and deceiving. And so that was kind of the first thing I started working with these glass pieces. So moving further into looking at language as a way to kind of interpret this transition between media and new media, or at least why we chose to start thinking about this transition, I really latched onto this idea, this term of digital, right? Well, if it's digital technology, which is almost synonymous with new media, we almost use them kind of flippantly, interchangeably. What did digital mean? And so in the etymology of this term, digital actually comes from digits, which is kind of our first interface, which of course is how we interface with a lot of digital technology now. But further still, there's many interesting kind of pieces of junk DNA that kind of transformed out of that. Like you can see in this image here, bits and bytes are what are basic units of binary code. And of course, there's 8 bits in a byte, and we have, of course, 8 fingers. So these relationships where it almost feels like we've abstracted from the physical world to kind of create a language and understanding and apparatus for this digital world, I think are really meaningful kind of artifacts of this transition from new media or media to digital media. And so, of course, sometimes these works on glass specifically reference this. So here we can see I/0 or 1/0, depends how you want to read it. 1 byte, 8 bits, 8 digits, 2 thumbs. So this kind of text piece, not only written with a digit, so you could call it a digital interface if you're really cheeky, I suppose, but also being kind of ambiguous about if I'm talking about, say, a file or if I'm talking about our fingers, right? And so another term, and you can see this motif in a lot of my work, is this idea of transparency. And as I said before, a digital interface can't presence nothing. It can't have absence. And so it always has to create something to describe absence, or what Derrida would call the presence of absence. So anyone who's used Photoshop remembers this transparent background, I'm sure, that's supposed to tell you, oh, there's nothing there. There's thin air. Or something is semi-transparent. But I love this artifact of how this is literally called a transparency grid background. This thing that we've taken a word to describe transparency and imparted it into this very opaque kind of system, right? Of course, transparency also linking to truth and telling the truth or being transparent with someone. And so this kind of wordplay, of course, I know I'm massaging things to generate interest in this idea, but I do think there's this very interesting change in culture that you can see if you follow language through media as well. So this was a piece using that idea as well as kind of the first one that I kind of imparted that artifact into the printed surface of these dust pieces. And so, of course, printing them on glass, but then kind of distorting them through these kind of digital means and adding in this transparency background into this image that's on glass. Sorry, there's a detail if you can see it. And so conflating these two kind of worlds, this material world of this material that is very transparent, and then imparting this transparency background to say that there's nothing there or something. That is a fascinating kind of gesture to me that could be done through a material process like printmaking. This is just another piece in which I use that kind of idea, that kind of motif of that transparent background, kind of just scribing with your finger in the dust into kind of that background. And so, of course, if a computer can't, or a digital interface can't presence nothing, you have to think about where this concept of zero or null came from, which, there's some history contested about when the number 0 came around, but there's some cultures that were thought never to have the number 0, because in their way of thinking, there was no point to having a number that didn't describe something of a numerical value. And so it's fascinating to me to think about with the technology of a single number, what different cultural differences, or even just differences of how you think about the world, there could be without this concept, right? And it's so the idea of the zero in computing and digital media is so important to how everything works. So there must be something culturally so significant there. And I kind of see the sculptures kind of holding this idea as well. Thinking about a stone or something that really has presence and has that weight and materiality that we're all so familiar with. And then making it hollow, right? And making the surface kind of withdraw into flatness is kind of something that I feel feels close to that, right? It's the same kind of gesture, or at least invokes maybe the same reaction to this thinking about presencing absence. Another word that I find that I use in a lot of my work to think through things is this idea of the artifact, right? So if we were archaeologists and we were digging through strata of dirt, and we would be searching for artifacts, right, or evidence, but also artifacts, right? And those things would be so key to our understanding of a culture, or even just the visual culture of a society, past or present. But in digital media, the artifact is something that we have no interest in. The artifact is actually something that's quite bad. And so if you think about compression artifacts, anything that's artifacted becomes kind of visible. And you're no longer looking at the image, you're looking at the hardware. And digital media is kind of this thing that always wants to recede into the background. When it starts to get these holes poked in it, or show its artifacts, or show its hardware, it starts to make itself present to us, which isn't its function, right? And so here we can see 3 pieces from another show that I did, where they're printed in different levels of compression. And the last one having the most evidence of artifacting, being all blocky and pixelated and things like that, and no longer reading as dust, and that communication kind of breaking down. So I really like that relationship between this idea of the artifact and it being in one way something we search for to understand a visual culture, but in our own, we kind of try to push to the background and see as unimportant to how we communicate. And the artifact can mean many different things too. Like in this piece, it's this poorly tiled kind of image of this dust kind of pattern on glass. And you can see the tiling. Here it is at Open Studio. You can see how it's poorly tiled, like you might do on a background of your PC or something like that. I've also kind of related it to this brick that I cast in ceramic as well, that just had this chip on the corner, right? So there was this artifact in my studio that I've kind of linked up with this kind of digital artifact that also kind of tiles. So this relationship between the material and the seemingly immaterial, and just seeing what that communication kind of puts forward for the viewer. And here's just a detail of it. And there's another work at Open Studio too that I really think connects to this idea of the artifact. I like this idea that my finger is like almost like a paintbrush in some ways. And so the digital form of that also being intermixed with this finger that can kind of moves across the surface of the glass. But of course, the gesture in the digital kind of space is much more blocky and cut and copy, and you know, has a hard edge and really is quite sanitary, right? So I was really interested in kind of mixing these 2 pieces, or these 2 kind of gestures of the hand together to kind of see what these spaces were like. Of course, compression too. We think about physical terms that are much more like verbs rather than qualities. Whereas in the digital space, you know, everything is just a quality. There's a virtue of it in a sense because it's virtual. So compressing these sculptures as they're wet and letting them dry and then get fired like that, and then linking them up with these pieces that I showed before that were also subjected to image compression. This one's maybe the most on the nose piece I've ever made, but and of course code too. Everyone always asks me about my work and why it is so kind of recalcitrant and is always pulling back and doesn't want to let you in. And I kind of like playing with this idea of code being something that, you know, of course, is used in digital images, but also code in my work kind of pointing to those apparatuses in kind of coded ways, and kind of being self-referential and talking kind of about itself in these very coded methods. So sometimes being almost like concrete poetry in the text pieces that I create on these printed glass works. There's just an artifact of a transparent kind of hole through the image space. Just an installation shot of that piece. And I think the last kind of term that I'll talk about that I find really interesting in here is virtual, right? Because if you think about virtual space, when we use this word these days, we think about, like, I don't know, maybe the metaverse or putting on a VR system or something. But of course, when something was virtual, that word isn't directly about morality, but it used to connect so much to morality. And so if something is virtuous, it's of certain qualities that we load up automatically. Whereas virtual just means virtually the same or of qualities, whatever those qualities are. So whether these spaces are virtuous, I can't actually comment on, but. So this is just a piece that I've kind of created a typeface of my hand. And I just really like the way that it kind of relates to this anxiety, between reproducibility and ephemerality and all these concepts that are so linked to I think digital media, but also to material media, right? And just another piece where I've created a typeface of my hand and kind of infinitely reproducing it at smaller font sizes until it's obviously no longer from a human hand. And this kind of disenfranchising of the human hand that can happen through digital media. Kind of an alienation. So I make quite a few works kind of just about this anxiety and kind of that relationship sometimes too. So this piece is printed in completely white ink, so you can only kind of see the shadow that it casts on either a floor, wall, or something like that. So in reading, the problem with turning on the lights is you can no longer see the darkness. Kind of this commentary on technology and media, that once you have it, you always lose something, right? There's the word reveal, I think, actually means to reveal if you break it down far enough. So to hide something again with something new. That's just an installation shot of it. And that's really most of what I wanted to show and discuss. But just like the work in its essence, I feel, to me, or at least I hope, kind of communicates taking these things that are very human and material, so the dust and the rocks that have very like base that we have very base and familiar understanding with. Like we understand that when dust kind of accumulates on a tablet of glass, and that tells us that it's been there for a certain amount of time, right? That's a certain knowledge that material can give us, but then also to indexicality. If someone writes in it that, oh, I was here, or puts a drawing of Kilroy or something into it, that points to the presence of someone was there. It's kind of a recording in itself. And so taking these digital means to then reproduce it and to kind of not necessarily dupe the viewer, but to show how easy it is to duplicate that materiality through digital media. I just hope it brings up questions for people about these really essential ideas that we have that really make up being, whether that's ephemerality or identity and things like that. That's really kind of the base message that I go for in my work and that I'm really thinking about when I create these things. Yeah, thanks so much. I hope that was not over 30 minutes.
That was great. Thank you, Alex. So we're going to turn it over to questions now. And as I said, you can write them in the chat. You can raise your hand if you have a question to ask. I'm just going to ask a super simple one to just get started, but about the title of the show, which is WYSIWYG, which I learned as a phrase yesterday, but it's written as an acronym, and whether you can just talk a bit about like the source for that.
Sure. Yeah. I wish I could talk about so many things. So the exhibition title, it's, like I said, there's always this urge for me to kind of like have the work recede back a little, so you'll take a step forward to kind of like think about it. So WYSIWYG is like a very opaque way. It's an old term that was used in like kind of earlier kind of interfaces for, say, printing or anything like that. But it actually means what you see is what you get. But printers and print operators would always say WYSIWYG, which I love that irony of this term that describes something that communicates transparently. So what you see on the screen is what's going to come out the computer or the printer or the CNC or whatever end tool you have. And I just love that how it's supposed to communicate transparency, but they created this term that was really quite opaque to anyone who wasn't in the know with it. And so I just thought also too, given the nature of all these kind of trompe-l'oeil surfaces and objects and things, it was just a fitting title to say what you see is what you get. Because there's so much that you don't see behind it that you never get. And the same goes for any digital media, of course, right? There's an entire network of cables that is essentially wrapping the earth that we can't see, that makes all of this possible. And if it failed, it would be probably a bigger catastrophe than most earthquakes. So
yeah, I was just listening to something this morning that was about the specific kind of microchips that go into basically everything that we use now, from mobile phones to cars, and that there's only 1 or 2 places in the world that make them, and they're in seismic areas of the world. And they were also talking about that kind of scale of influence that could have should something happen to one of those producers.
Yeah.
Francisco Fernando has his hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, thank you.
Hello.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for your talk. I mean, it's a question, but I think it's more of a wondering, because I'm not sure that it's a fair question to ask of anybody. But I think the thing that struck me the most about your talk was this meditation on the opacity and the transparency and gesture, especially linking back to that Liechtenstein image and the almost like suspension of the gesture. Is your sense that the artist's gesture or your gesture as an artist, is it transparent? Is there a kind of almost like truth to materials to the artist's gesture, or does it remain, even as it might form language, even as it might form the likeness of something, does it remain opaque?
I can't remember who said this, but a lie always points better to the truth. Maybe that's not a very good answer. Maybe that's a very me answer. But I would say it's a truth to material, but not to material things. So I feel like I'm expressing a truth to material about digital media, but digital media doesn't have a material, right? And so I'm trying to create this presence of something that can't be presented through those other modalities, if that makes sense. I know that's very convoluted, but it's like at the very beginning, like I've taken you through this kind of not like theatrical, but it's like orchestrated way of like how I came to this idea. But like at the base of it, I was just like, does digital media have a material? And like, if it can't, can I, through art, because that's what art does so well, is it makes things that don't exist so that we can see them, or at least, like it fabricates or things like that in order to communicate an idea, right? And so I was like, can I create a material for this immaterial thing so we can experience that? I don't even know. And I don't know if it's successful or if it's like, if we've duped ourselves further and it doesn't actually bring us information about the thing. But I don't know if that answers anything, but
Well, you're making me think that it's perhaps maybe the staging of transparency that can point towards opacity best.
oh, okay, okay. I think I understand. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's a kind of interesting thing there with print as well, just the kind of positive and negative, and what is revealed through a final image that is not conveyed through the like physical process you go through to get there.
Mhm.
There's
Yeah, there's always some translation.
this kind of positive and negative as a kind of diptych.
Yeah.
We have a question from Greg in the chat, which I thought maybe would come up, seeing as the current conversation is very AI kind of focused. He says, love the talk, Alex. Do you think the emergence of AI-generated art will have a similar social shift from print and the physical to the digital, despite both digital and AI-generated art being immaterial?
Like, I think I think like you remember those slides where I was talking about kind of conceptual era artwork and how this curator was very intelligently, I think, putting it next to all these kind of generative artworks. And there was a lot of AI generated artworks in there as well. But I think like we've already kind of been there in a different way. We just have a different tool for doing it now. And so like the credo of conceptual artists was the dematerialization of the art object, right? And I feel like in AI art, like we've kind of achieved that dematerialization, but we're also trying to dematerialize labor and things like that as well. So I think it's just like another step in that idea. I don't know if it's completely different, and it's certainly kind of just a tool, I think, at this stage. But like, I think the most important kind of thing in that conversation is that these tools are no longer mimicking the body. Like they're no longer like a V-gouge carver or something like that, or a printing press or something. Now they mimic the nervous system, essentially. Like it's always been a game of mimicry with technology, right? And extending those faculties. And I think that's the big difference. I don't know what that means for art. Maybe AI artists will be like selling works like Damien Hirst or something like that, or I'm not sure. But I think there will always be this kind of interest, this interest in kind of the artist, whether we defer the hand out of it. People always want to get their hand in there, even just to put authorship on AI generated work. But it's a sticky conversation. I think it's definitely an interesting one.
Yeah, still unfolding as we speak, I think, as well as the new technologies coming out. Just to go back to like material process, Derek asks, could you say a bit about your print process?
Sure, absolutely. So I have a few ways that I produce these images, depending on what kind of gesture and what kind of thing I'm trying to achieve with them. So I either create them through silkscreen or through lithography. So if I'm creating them through silkscreen, I have this kind of apparatus that's kind of like a Claude glass, if anybody knows what that is. And it's essentially like a black surface, and I deposit all this white dust onto it through essentially this tent and this like air system that deposited. Is why I don't talk too much about it in the talk, because it's like really, it goes back really far. And then I'll scribe into it with my finger, and so that's like the analog kind of process of it. And then I photograph it with a high resolution camera. I bring that into into Photoshop or whatever digital tools I'm going to use on it. I make manipulations to kind of that surface, and then I'll create a film of it, and then I shoot it to a silk screen and print it onto the glass, sometimes edition, sometimes a one-off, and then the work is kind of done there. Through lithography, I use a couple different methods. So sometimes I'll screen onto screen onto the lithography plate to create a resist. So that's how I'll get my photographic image onto there, or my manipulated image onto it. Or I'll image transfer toner images to the plate. or I'll use like a deposition method that uses like an electrode or an air system to deposit, say, toner onto it, and probably a combination of all three usually in order to make a composition or a certain project idea that I have. And then I print those through the lithography press. There's some more details in there, as you can imagine, because printing onto plexiglass is like not like printing onto paper, but that's the simplest way I can put it forward. And so there's almost always this thing where I start with something real, I manipulate it digitally, and then I print it onto a surface to kind of create this kind of trompe l'oeil representation that merges these two kind of spaces together.
That's great. That was a really concise description, but I'm sure there'll be more questions about it. And please do come and see the show as well. I love that the lithography involves screen printing to get the image to create the lithograph from too. It also feels like a weirdly like, it's a very analog way of working, but it's like a digital kind of layering of things together to create the matrix to then print from, to me. Just a comment from Laura, who says she loves the idea of fragility also being given importance in your work. And then it's fascinating how you capture the permanence of dust, for instance, which is usually so ephemeral and often overlooked or unimportant, but it's part of everything, everywhere. That's a lovely comment. Thank you, Laura. And we've got time for one more question from Ruth. Ruth, you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I don't show myself. I don't think I'm presentable. First of all, thank you so much. Fascinating talk. Fascinating talk. I could talk to you for hours. So the question is, you seem to talk about the virtual world and the real world, you know, sort of like a 1 and a 0. But we're getting to the point with things like AR, where there is an overlapping of these two, and there is not a clear distinction between the 1 and the 0.
I'm so sorry. My headphones blipped out right as you started to say your question.
Oh,
I'm
no.
so sorry. They're back on now for some reason. I'm so sorry. Could you state it again? I'm so
No, yeah, I was just saying that in your description, it seems like, you know, your world is divided sort of like a 1 and a 0, where like the virtual world is completely virtual, and then there is the reality. But I think we're getting to the point with like something like AR, when there is an overlapping of the two worlds, or like quantum computers where the 1 and the 0 are at the same place at the same time. So what do you think about that? How do you think that will affect your work? And I think that's very interesting, especially AR, you know, because you not only you establish that third layer that is also a bit more democratic because anyone can be in it, and then extend the reality when you can even get, you know, the environment to affect what you're seeing. So anyways, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in quantum computing or anything like that. I think it's like extremely fascinating. But I've always, you know, like my work kind of like I kind of play with the question of if they're actually like 1 and 0 in order to kind of like force an answer in some ways. So I play devil's advocate a little bit, but I actually see the digital world as like very physical. Like I said, like if the internet failed to work one day, it would be a catastrophic event, like beyond almost anything, beyond COVID or anything like that. And so these things, even if they are like neural networks or just like very immaterial things, like they have real physical like hardware, and then they also have like real physical implications, not only on our hardware and environment, but also like our wetware, right? So I kind of play devil's advocate in the work of being like, is it this or this, like to kind of just to problematize, but I also think
do you think now the next, exactly, you're still playing with that dichotomy, and now I think you're probably gonna be able to play with like the two things being the same at the same time. And I don't know, I'm just saying, maybe I was trying to ask what's next for you, if that's your inspiration, you know, if technology is one of your inspirations.
I do think data sets are like massively interesting. Like I've thought a lot about if I See, my problem is I'd always want to be in control of the technology. I don't want to be like using apps or something like that, like Dolly Mini or something like that. But like, I think data sets are super interesting. Like if I could create works that were like, you know, capture every like smiley face written in dust on the back of a car window for the next 10 years, and then have an AI amalgamate the most smiley face version of that or something, like this, very like to maybe like communicate how normalizing this technology is, right? I haven't quite got there yet. I'm still kind of exploring this work. And of course that would mean like building new skill sets and things like that too. But like, I do think there's something in there that like could interface with my work. But
Yeah, I really love it. I'm looking forward to seeing the exhibit in person.
yeah.
Thank you.
And I think another thing too is just thinking like, I have a very slow process because I overthink everything, as you can probably see from my presentation. And I think like before I'd like jump into that world in a way where I present something, I'd really want to like think carefully about what those gestures and modalities actually are before I make a statement about them, in the same way that I've kind of playfully, but also very carefully kind of thought about the implications of this technology and like what's actually the gesture and that artifact and things like that. So it doesn't come off too hot, you know, because it's a very hot topic. And sometimes the hotter the way you present it, the faster it burns out and fades away. And so I really want always want staying power, where there's something like, in 20 years, this isn't going to look like it was fad art, I hope. Anyways, that's just my inner thoughts. I don't know if it's actually important to my practice.
Right, I think so. Last comment. I think it was fantastic the way you managed to synthesize that on those, you know, the selection of the phrases and everything, because I don't know, you pack so much into it. I find that it's really difficult. No, it's really difficult to do. Like, I don't even know how you arrive to those are the pieces that is going to be in the show after all this analysis. Like, yeah, really good.
Yeah. And a question I always get, I know we got to wrap it up soon. A question I always get too is like, do you expect me to get all that from this? And I'm not saying you're saying that, but it's like, but I'm always like, no, this is like a structure and a framework for helping me make decisions on what's important or what's interesting to me. And that's kind of something I always think is important to say, that I'm like, this isn't like a lesson or a morality thing. Like, this is like a structure of play that I've created for myself, and looking at language. Maybe there's a piece there. What can I make from that idea, right?
That's great. Thanks, Ruth, for those questions. And thanks so much again, Alex. And I'm sure we're all going to go back to our screens after this and think about them in a slightly different way as we scroll on our tablets and look at our internet histories and think about the words and how that kind of relates to something concrete as well as something digital. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us and for doing such an amazing talk for us. I'd like to really encourage everyone to come and see our current set of shows, which includes WYSIWYG by Alex Linfield. They're running through June 3rd, so you have plenty of time to come and see it. And it really is a show that demands to be seen in person, because there is so much play between visibility and invisibility in the show. It's very hard to capture on digital imagery, so please do come and see it in person. If you missed the previous Print Speak talks, they're available on YouTube. So Laura's going to post some links in the chat for different things. One will be the Print Speak talk page. We also have our online fundraising auction, Future Proof, coming up really shortly. It launches next week on May 4th and runs through May 14th. The auction is a great place to see and purchase some fantastic artworks by artists who've been kind enough to donate their work to Open Studio to raise funds for our studio space. All the proceeds will go into supporting the studio and the programs that we run. So please do check out that link and just let us know if you have any questions. As always, the Print Speak sessions are free, but if you really enjoyed the talk and you'd love to donate, then please do. And we have another Print Speak talk coming up. We're just kind of fine-tuning the details for that, but keep your eyes peeled because we have a couple more before the end of the season. But yeah, thank you for spending your afternoon with us, and hope you have a great rest of your day. And thanks again so much, Alex, for putting together such a great presentation.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks all for spending your time with me.